Stay tuned to the end of this video for a word to our patrons. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. It's a beast of a day today, viewers and chatters, so we'll be talking about a uniquely beast-class servant, Sodom's Beast / Draco, a.k.a. Draco. Yeah, we're going to use the short one. And here on Wanted, we fire off with history, folklore, mechanics, and more, so I hope you stay tuned for all of my revelations. And you also usually, if there's going to be like a spoiler issue, I put a warning here. We will be completely spoiling the story of the FGO arcade game, but unless they port arcade sometime this decade, I don't think my applicable audience can even play through it on their own time. So I'm not going to give any specific warnings or call-outs in the future. This is your blanket warning, I guess. Anyway, we move into it. So, you may guess from a servant titled Sodom's Beast / Draco, we're not going to be focusing exclusively on Emperor Nero, but while there are going to be significant divergences between the two characters, there's a bit of bridging material we need to bring up. You know, we got to explain how we got here. So, Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, born December 15th, 37 CE, died 9th June 68 Common Era, ruled as the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Nero ascended to the throne after the death of the emperor Claudius, Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, who adopted Nero after marrying Nero's mother, Agrippina the Younger. Claudius is generally accepted to have been poisoned, possibly by the famous poisoner Locusta, at the behest of Agrippina, so her son could take the throne, but he was aged and sickly, so there's some debate on if this exactly occurred, but it's been a very popular theory both at the time and throughout history, so, you know, it's worth mentioning. Julia Agrippina, known as Agrippina the Younger, because her mother was also Agrippina, was pretty well connected in the Julio-Claudian dynasty herself. Her great-grandfather was Augustus, that one. Her father was the general Germanicus, considered at the time to be Rome's Alexander the Great. He was a pretty all-right guy. And her elder brother became the Emperor Caligula. I think he was older. I didn't actually run through my Caligula run. That will be for another point. A wanted that's never coming. And obviously married Claudius and was mother to Nero. During the early years of Nero's reign, she basically served as co-ruler. She would appear on coins together. She would use other imperial prerogatives in government, but eventually their relationship seems to have become contentious, and eventually, you know, he sent her away from the palace and ultimately had her executed. Now, I'm going to mention this bit to bridge the bridge. I know, there's a lot of bridges involved. Don't burn them. So, I'm going to bring this up because our sources on Nero, especially contemporarily, not always the most trustworthy, and we'll get there in a second, hold on. But there is a general consensus from various historians and just factual dealings that after Agrippina's death, Nero seems to have taken a turn. He started dealing more harshly with rivals and enemies. You know, records indicate he started holding trials for treason after Agrippina's death. Generally listened to the Roman Senate less and started to kind of, you know, diverge away from a more functional government that had been going on. Now, Nero always had a bit of a contentious relationship with the Senate and the noble class of Rome. Many sources would describe him later as a tyrant, either for personal excesses, which there were plenty, mishandling of the Great Fire of Rome, the execution of his political enemies, which, you know, included a matricide, and the later sources attributing him to the persecution of Christians. But a lot of this reads as a post-facto justification. More contemporary sources that we've got also note that Nero was big on public entertainment and public works. The news of his death was met with more concern from the lower classes, such as slaves, entertainers, and the common attendees of arenas and theaters. Like I said, Nero was big on public works and public entertainment, so this made him very popular with common people, but these were funded with taxes on the upper classes, and also this is a time period when generally that sort of thing was not seen as being hip and Roman. You know, Emperor Nero would go on stage and perform, which the upper crust of Rome thought was, you know, for slaves and, like, very, very lower class people. Also, I'm not here to riddle it. Wow, that one was really bad. I'm going to leave that in. Laugh at me. Not here to relitigate the Great Fire of Rome, but I want to bring up a couple points. Number one, definitely didn't have a fiddle. It would have been a liar, but that's also probably apocryphal, but definitely not a fiddle. If anybody says that, they're stupid. The fiddle didn't exist yet. But we also have conflicting sources on his behavior during the fire. Some would go so far as to say he caused the fire for various silly reasons, clearing land for the theater or wanting a fiery backdrop for the sacking of Troy in a play. Others say, he didn't do anything while it occurred. Some even talk about, pushing the blame off onto the local Christian population for it. But we have other contemporary sources who say he was in Antium when it started, and he returned to Rome to organize relief efforts, paid for handling of the dead and injured out of his own pockets. Take your own conclusions about which seems more likely. But we're going to ultra compact this story down because we have a lot to cover still. The actual proper bridge into Draco is the story or legend of Nero Redivivus. It would actually be Redivivus, because the V's are pronounced that way. I'm going to pronounce it with a V because I don't think I can say Redivivus seriously the number of times I'm going to have to say it. You can also phrase that translated as Nero Reborn. So Emperor Nero is supposed to have, according to the historical sources, committed suicide somewhere outside of Rome after basically waking up one day and discovering him abandoned by all followers, unable to flee the city for various reasons. This was during a time period when there were multiple rebelling governors outside of Rome, and they seem to have either paid off everybody or just everybody in the upper crust was tired enough of Nero to support it. So, completely isolated, was unable to flee the city for various reasons, committed suicide, and this end of Nero's reign resulted in the very chaotic period known as the Year of Four Emperors. It didn't go well. As much as the Senate didn't like Nero, they had a rough patch after him. And it was reported at the time that some people in some of the eastern provinces, for instance, just denied that he died straight up. They were like, oh, you're making that up. This was possibly aided by some accounts that were given at the time that at least one attendant did show up and attempt to stop him from bleeding out, but according to history, didn't succeed. But, we're talking about, the believability of people. Turn on your fringe news sources today and see the shit what people will believe in the world of, instant telecommunications, and you can have video and audio of anything, anytime, anywhere, and people still believe shit that is, blatantly untrue. Talk about, the year sub 100. But, again, also, as a side note, talking about Nero's popularity with the people, if Nero was so unpopular with everyone, why were there multiple imposters or pseudo-Neros after his death? People who claimed to be the Emperor Nero to reclaim the throne. And these were serious enough issues that they had to be dealt with by the mainstream Roman government. But yes, there were, I believe, at least 3 attempts for someone to claim to be Emperor Nero, either reborn magically or just having not died. The belief in Nero Redivivus was so well known and reported that it went all the way down to the 400s CE and beyond, where it was remarked upon by the author St. Augustine. According to him, there were people who to that day believed it, that somehow the Emperor Nero was alive and well and would just pop out. And this brings us to our second important bridge in moving to the beast part, which is related to the history and folklore of Judaism and Christianity. There are some contemporary sources that claim Nero persecuted Christians. Tacitus says it's related to the fire. Suetonius just says that it was because Christianity at the time was the new cult on the block, so it was just hip to oppress them. They were new and weird. Later, by which I mean at least 100 years later, Christian sources would run with this. Some would claim that Nero was the first persecutor of Christians. Though I'd like to point out that, speaking about the issue, Suetonius claims that it was the Emperor Claudius who expelled Jews from Rome over the matter of Christ. There's also a probably apocryphal narrative that began to circulate many years after Nero's death that he was responsible for the deaths of the apostles Peter and Paul, including the story of having St. Peter crucified upside down. Again, there's no real historical basis for this either way. There's no really solid records one way or the other, but this is a thing that people started thinking in later centuries. They started applying this story. There's also a definitely apocryphal story accounted in the Talmud where during a conflict between Greeks and Jews in Jerusalem, the Emperor Nero appeared to settle things. He got spooked by some stuff happening and allegedly converted to Judaism, but, I'll take stuff that didn't happen for 100. Anyway, to let you know where we're at in the script, this took me a page and a half of notes to get to the point that at some point in history, the claims of Nero's persecution of Christians and the Redivivus legend seem to have merged together over time to paint the Emperor Nero as the Antichrist, Antichristos. The Antichrist is a figure that has some passing mentions in the Bible, person who denies the Father and the Son, and is linked to warnings against false prophets, something called the Man of Sin, which also has a couple of different interpretations, and the Beast of Revelation. Also tangent, at least once, Antichrist is pluralized, so it's not necessarily a singular guy. You can pluralize Antichrists. The Beast of Revelation is actually 3 beasts, as described in the Book of Revelation. There's the dragon, which is Satan. There's the Beast of the Sea, the Antichrist, and the Beast of the Land, the false prophet. The Beast of the Sea is the one with 7 heads, 10 horns, and is described as looking like a leopard, a bear, and a lion. In Revelation, the beast is also ridden by the Whore of Babylon. They're given all their authority by the dragon. All the peoples of the earth are said to follow and worship the beast, and ultimately, though, the Beast of the Sea is defeated by Christ and thrown in a lake of fire. Pretty typical stuff. And lots of early Christian writers often conflated the concept of the Antichrist or the beast with either the Roman Empire in general or Nero in specific. So the number of the beast, which is usually written to be 666, there are some actual, really old texts that would have given the numerals as 616, but 666 can be done through some transliteration work to be... It'll give it away if I pronounce it correctly. So the letters come out to NRON-QSR, which is... Basically, if I'm understanding the transliteration correctly, is the Hebrew spelling of the Greek writing of Neron Caesar or Nero Caesar, which is still pronounced Nero Kaiser, but, my notes are written with different letters to let you know how we're going. Also, the way the beast and the Revelation stuff is described, there's some other arguments as well for linking them directly. Rome, supposedly breaking into 10 provinces after the fall of the Eastern Empire. It was founded on 7 hills, and so on and so forth. There's some actual, through lines there that it could be a lot of symbolism for Rome, which, again, given the current position of the Vatican, is very funny. Also, I'll talk about it again later, but fate heads now. I should even say type moon heads. That's technically not related to fate. Don't worry, my notes later are better. Also, Babylon, as in the Whore of Babylon, whose full name is... Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. You thought the Roman emperor names were the longest. Could actually be a reference to the city of Babylon. They did perform a sort of exile or captivity of the Jews from their homelands, but it could also be a coded reference to Rome. Babylon the person is supposed to be a representation of the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So at the time of the writing, Rome would have been, the biggest, most important city. Babylon is also described in Revelations in a passage as being destroyed, becoming a home for demons and various unclean things and a home of depravity. Lots of things linking up back here. But basically, this right here is not the place for me to try and unpack the entire book of Revelations, but despite what pop culture may tell you, Revelations is not necessarily supposed to be a future portent of the apocalypse. A perfectly valid interpretation of the text is that it is interpreting past or current events to the time when the people were writing down the text. So that means, after all of that, we can do the lore and talk about Sodom's Beast. First, I'm going to force you to refer back to the Wanted on Tiamat I just posted to get a fuller picture of Beast so I don't have to repeat myself in this video, which is already going to be pretty long and probably had some complicated stuff to explain to get here. Literally, the history part was 12 minutes. So we're not going to reiterate that stuff. I'll give you the short version if you want more. I literally put out a video a week ago. Watch it. Actually, I don't even know if I put it out a week ago. It was 3 or 4 days ago it went public. Anyway, short version. The 7 beasts, the evils of humanity. Each is based around a logos, which is their core sin, but also the source of their love for humanity. Sodom's Beast is the juvenile or incomplete form of Beast 6S, who represents the logos of depravity or immorality. She is supposed to emerge when an individual city reaches an apex of depravity before it falls. Basically, heralding the end of an age when a culture starts to morally stagnate, but before it actually declines, that kind of stuff. You can hopefully put together the thematics. Also, remember I said there were 7 beasts? Yeah, that's a lie. Some beasts, confirmed to at least be 3 and 6, have L and R halves. Basically the same logos, the same core raison d'etre, but divided into 2 equal but opposite points. So Beast 6 is actually Sodom and Gomorrah, S and G, which are 2 biblical cities destroyed by God for their excessive behavior, such as having great wealth but lacking charity, general scumminess, practicing adultery, and other stuff. So, Beast 6S takes the form of a what-if of Emperor Nero, who is a girl in fate, don't question me, and instead of meeting her end, she returned to Rome. What exactly that means is not super elaborated on in, like, the background text. We'll see if the event gets into that more in detail with exposition, but for now, it's just a mythological world where Emperor Nero returned, basically applying both the legend of Nero Redivivus and also the conflation of Nero as the Antichrist. So not a true-to-life fact, but a what-if world, a possible timeline where that stuff occurred. And, you know, following usually how fate goes with applying mythology and kind of the kitchen sink approach, it's something that does make sense. Now, because Nero is a woman, she uses the alias of the Whore of Babylon, or Mother Harlot, though obviously, as we said, Beast 6S, aka Sodom's Beast, is just as applicable. Now, this has very old-school roots in FGO and Fate Grand Order. A writer class servant named Mother Harlot with the character voice of Sakura Tange, who is Nero's voice actress, had been data mined since very early in the game. And obviously, this is linked to Extra, where Gawain uses this as an insult for Nero. They also mention Mother Harlot in BB's own Golden Chalice Cup of Stuff. And in Koha Ace, there was an illustration of Nero with a cop riding a seven-headed dragon. So they've been setting this up for a long time. It just feels like... I'm editorializing right now, by the way. We're going off book. But if I had to guess, I would assume that, much like many other things going on, Nasu and other members of the Type Moon team had ideas for how a quote-unquote beast Nero, or the, like, ultimate evil version of Nero would appear. Maybe as, like, an altar, which is why she started as a rider and not, like, a weird extra class. But ultimately, whatever plans to actually use that in early FGO got scrapped and reallocated to Arcade. Now, each beast has a special authority. Their authority of the beast. It gives them unique powers that kind of, you know, conflate to their logos and their role. Beast 6S has the special authority rendered as Nega Messiah, the ability to negate and counteract all blessings and powers of faith, would also grant special affinity to attack the extra class of Saviors, aka the Saver class. We don't have a lot of interactions there, but that's a thing that allegedly would happen. Now, it has been long suggested by the Extra timeline and even the abilities of the Summer Nero, her Theater of the Sea and her Seven Crowns ability, that Nero is one of those characters who has the potential as a beast candidate. Her name is linked with the Book of Revelation, and like I said, Type Moon old heads know. There's some action on the phrase NRVNQSR, and obviously there are thematical comparisons between herself, Tama no Mai, who is another possible, or I guess you could argue even technically previous evil of humanity, BB and Kiara. What Emiya as the third guy in Extra does in a setup, I don't know. I guess he's just chilling. Maybe we're supposed to compare Nameless to Messiahs, not anti-Messiahs. Anyway, we'll draw new conclusions when we get the Extra remake. Also, the Beast of Revelation has pretty long-running implications in Fate, being alluded to as far back as Prototype, as the Beast of 666, which also, obviously, you know, if we're numeraling them, making it the sixth one. Anyway, this is a character, a creature that Arthur Pendragon is pursuing, and this has basically all been outright stated, and possibly even outright stated, to be Beast 6G, the other half of S. But yes, anyway, the bus finally came back in the timeline of FGO Arcade. In this different manifestation of Chaldea, Beast 6 comes forth to perform the incineration of humanity. She's doing this to imitate Gaetia's plan, because, strictly speaking, as Beast 1, Gaetia's appearance is supposed to, you know, herald that all 6 beasts must appear, or all 7 total, after him. But she's doing this not for his misguided sense of pity, you know, he's going to use humanity as fuel. She's doing it because she just wants to eat the human order. She wants to fuck up the timeline, cause everything to go wonky, and then when it's most delicious, eat it. So basically, she uses replica singularities to draw Chaldea in and allow her own ascension from her larval form to her true beast form, and that is that game's final conflict. And I do want to say, like I said, this tracks. Unlike Beast 1 and 2, who are real mythological figures catalyzed into beasts by circumstance, Gaetia is the actual Ars Gaetia demons, you know, the seal of and keys of Solomon. Tiamat is Tiamat. They are kind of like created in their beast forms by circumstances of fucking with time and space, but that's something that can still happen in this universe. Beast 6S is a what if, which didn't come to pass in the primary world line. And presumably, depending on how things go, either it didn't change history, in which case it doesn't matter, or if it did fuck up the human order, that timeline would be pruned. Funny how that works, guys. But using a side universe, as its origin point to work as like this possible person existing in all times and spaces appears and is like, this is how I can figure my shit out. Works. Also, it's still Gaetia's fault, though. Mods, pummel Gaetia with faux plushies. Anyway, in Arcade, Mother Harlot is defeated by her Chaldea and some Grands. She's reduced back to her juvenile state. This is the alter ego Nero Draco from Arcade. And that should be all she wrote, but obviously, playing with the timey-wimey ball has come back to roost in FGO's primary timeline. So we will see that wrap back up in the core plot line. I will not expand further because the event's not out yet as the time I'm writing this. I do have a couple of other unique notes, though, I want to bring up. First of all, Draco's final ascension is locked until you complete the Lilum Harlot event, just like Sen no Ryuku, so enjoy that. She is the second ever servant to do that, I believe, though obviously there are story servants or limited servants released during story chapters that also do this. And also, canonically, like literally there's an explanation for why her animation is different. We don't summon Draco. Chaldea's fate system literally can't do that. Draco just uses her power to temporarily disable the summoning system and summon herself. I think this is the first explicit case of somebody using independent manifestation that way. That is a power that beasts are supposed to have, but rarely comes up. And now, after being lost in the desert for 20 minutes or something, we've come to mechanics. Draco is our first playable beast class unit, so this means we have to ascribe her class advantage. So, assuming the wiki not lying to me, the way Draco works is she gets times 1.5 damage against the original 7 servant classes. Well, it's still 2x against Berserker, but you know what I mean. But she deals half damage times 0.5 to the extra classes, Ruler, Avenger, Moon Cancer, Alter Ego, Foreigner, Pretender. She, in return, takes half damage from the 7 playable servant classes, the classic ones, but takes double from those extras. Shielder, as always, is neutral, as are the other playable beast combos. So obviously this means that inherently she has a lot of potential strengths and weaknesses. And on the side of core stats, obviously there's not a lot of comparison to do, but in general for an SSR, seems to be on the higher attack, lower HP, framework, but is not quite to either extreme. She is quick arts, buster, with high hits and NP gain to compensate. Also, a word on star weight and generation. Usually, for a class, this is roughly analogous, so I don't, reiterate it every time. You can look up, generally, what the average, star generation and star weight of a servant are based on their class. Since she's the only of her type for now, though, I do want to weigh in and say that she has average star generation and higher, but not quite peak star weight. Similar, star generation to, a Saber and a couple of other of the average star gen classes, and higher weight, I think it's basically the same as Archer, though obviously Riders have more. So, funnily enough, her Noble Phantasm is actually single target arts. It just deals damage, and its overcharge effect is a further additional damage multiplier to 7 Knights servants, aka the original 7 classes. So, that's it. She's just a big hater on the core classes. Her first skill gives you 5 to 10% NP for 6 turns, and a 6 times unlimited turns of a 20 to 30% crit up and a 500 to 1000 damage cut. Second skill is your big debuff, hits all enemies with 1 turn of skill seal, 3 turns of a pretty gnarly 3k to 5k burn, reduces their charge by 1, and also gives herself a 20 to 40% attack up for 3 turns, and the special status holding Grail ownership. Gives her a little cup icon, okay? This is good, because her third skill is pretty bad if you don't have the Grail status up. Not that you're likely to lose it, per se, because it's just a conditional. It's not classed in the code as a buff or debuff. But there may still be chances where you might shed it. Anyway, her third skill relies on it. If you don't have that effect up, its effect is just 1 time 3 turns, 100% buff removal resist, which is good, but for, a whole skill, not very effective. If you do have the little Grail status icon, though, she gets quite a lot of buffs. She gets 20 to 40% damage up versus both Dragon and Roman trait enemies, 5 to 10 stars per turn, and another 10 to 20% NP per turn, both for 3. For those same 3, she also gets 10 to 20% healing received increased, ignores defense, and just gets 1 time flat out of debuff immune. So, quite a lot of good stat infusions there. Her passives are just a flat 10% crit up, and also the instant independent manifestation, though its rank is very low, that gives you a very small amount of crit chance or crit damage up, instant kill resistance, mental debuff resistance, and her special Nega Messiah skill for a huge debuff success rate. Her debuffs will basically always proc unless the enemy is immune. So this puts us at an interesting spot where Draco is definitely a boss killer. She has a variety of class advantages to kind of plug and play her into any battles as needed. It was interesting reading this, and I kind of feel like there's going to be two angles. I myself, until I got into the nitty-gritty, was kind of like thinking that, like, man, she's very simple and straightforward. I don't know how good this is. But, you know, you think about it and you start building together the script, and you're like, okay, no, this is pretty good. This is very, very high potential. Like, her ceiling is super, super high, Chad. Before I say anything else, let me get that out of the way. It's not in the script yet, but I'm just going to say, the ceiling on damage, high. It's a big ceiling. But like I said, some people might just glance at Draco and just kind of, like, not get it because she is actually a very simple unit on paper. But also a lot of people went, oh, this unit is so OP, she's so broken, I can't believe they made her, or I can't believe they would make her so limited to make more money. I don't want to downplay how effective Draco is, but I also feel like some of the people in that second camp may be overblowing her. Like I said, she's very strong. She's immensely strong. She's also very straightforward. There's no, like, 5D math here for you to figure it out other than how much whales are willing to spend to try for an NP6. The actual way this servant works is very simple, and while that does give her a shitload of flexibility, it also means there are some things that she is not going to be good at. So, I don't know. Like, this may be just a personal philosophy, chatters at home, viewers, listeners, content consumers of all types. I don't actually think a servant is quote-unquote overpowered or broken and, like, to a detriment of the game unless they somehow literally did everything. Like, unless you created a servant who could perfectly farm every node you need to farm and also kill every boss you need to kill, I don't think we're in the quote-unquote broken state. Draco's pretty cool, but I'm reasonably certain that there would be some extra class boss situations where even with her very good abilities, she would not be able to tough it out as well. To compare this point, I want to bring up a short discussion here. I want to use an example of one of the old school OG, like, best in slot type servants. We're going to use Kentoki as an example. He has the exact same attack stat as Draco. He is a berserker, so when class advantage applies, which admittedly, thanks to adding extra classes, is not universal, but it works for the core 7 knights. So he's actually at 2x in that case. I think it's 2x. Have I just misremembered how berserker works? Okay, yes, no. So it is 1x. It's a perfect comparison. So you're dealing 1 point x, you're taking 2x, normal for berserkers. But berserkers have an inherent damage multiplier of 1.1. That's probably where I'm getting my math off. I'm like, I know it's higher than just 1.5. So berserkers deal damage generally very applicably, have the exact same attack stat Kentoki does. He has a buster NP, so his amount of base damage dealt is higher than Art's, though obviously the multipliers for NP levels is bigger on Art's NPs, so it can level out. Kentoki's NP is inherently defense ignoring. It ignores defense every time, as opposed to Draco, where she's got a 3-turn skill drop. And Kentoki also has his huge 50% attack up for 1 turn, which is a higher percentage. And he's a little bit of buster up and damage plus passively. The main difference maker here, obviously, and yes, I say obviously, but if I don't say it obviously, you will yell at me. Draco's overcharge effect kicks in here. She's adding extra NP damage, like straight up multiplying her damage to this end. But getting the most mileage out of that is going to depend on your ability to manipulate overcharge. This is going to be dependent on craft essences, team cop, and obviously the other possible one, NP copies. Now, the difference here also, which should be obvious, but I'm going to reiterate once again because I don't want to take for granted that the audience will also get me. Draco is a unit that has much better sustain than a unit like Kentoki. Basically, the argument I'm getting at and why I brought up Kentoki is, like, people are going to tell you that, like, Draco's must roll, you're going to die if you don't roll her. She's so rare, she's so powerful. Yes, she's going to make a lot of fights easier, but depending on how long you've been in this game and what other servants you may have, you may be able to do fights just as easily as you could anyway. The thing I want to bring up, though, is the strategy that's going to make it much longer is, like I said, sustain. Basically, for 6 turns, she's going to crunch 10% NP per turn passively. It really helps out the fact that she only has 1 quick and 1 arts card. And for 3 of those turns, you're probably hitting her Grail buff, so that's going to be a total of 30%. So, that's 90% of the way over there. That's a pretty good refund. So that's going to keep you resupplied with the ability to fire her NP pretty regularly. Kentucky and lots of other old school Buster units are kind of one and done. That's why they kind of fell out of the meta, because they introduced break bars, so you couldn't one and done enemies. Also, Draco has some solid defensive tools, like with her damage cut and stuff. She has a defensive class advantage, a lot like a ruler, which is the primary advantage over using old school berserkers in this case. So she can tank out some fights. This, as I just said, is much more ideal in the era of break bars. The ability to sustain through a couple of turns, hit your NP 2 or 3 times in a fight and chew up bars and not automatically die when the boss does something really annoying when you break the bar. Obviously, with support servants and CE master skills and stuff, like, everybody has the strategy tools to get around that when things are down. But it's one of those things I say that, like, Draco is really, really good, not just at damage ceiling, but also at sustain. So I would also say that don't feel like you have to go all in on multiple NP copies, even though I said that is part of what makes her ceiling potential so high. Just getting one copy and then maxing out those skills, you can probably schmoove through a lot of fights. I also do want to say that, just like, again, looking at the numbers here, I think Draco might struggle with some ads in some cases. She does have 3 Buster cards and some crit potential. I think the idea is you're going to want to use those Buster cards and crits on turns against the boss while you're waiting for her to passively cycle back to her NP. Her 5k burn can help, but will not weed out most tough ads on boss phases. But she does have good skull tools. The, 1-turn skill seal, I think it's technically, like, if I understand the math correctly, assuming they're not technically different modifiers, she has, like, a 700% chance to do her charge down, because it's the, like, 500% guaranteed effect, and also she gets, like, plus 200 off Nega Messiah. So, her charge down's gonna hit. A lot of her debuffs are gonna hit always. So that should keep you paused out there to deal with additional hitters. Now, luckily, especially for dealing with ads, you have a team comp for this. Draco does have an arts NP, so you can consider her with Castoria. That will probably make it so that you can fire her NP multiple times during your 3-turn burst window. You've got 3 turns when all your buffs are up. Castoria helps you with NP gain and automatic charging, and also gives you even more attack. Should work out pretty good. Also could give her even more trait damage, even if that's not going to overlap a lot. Who doesn't love that? You can also try Lady Avalon, funnily enough. And I say funnily enough because Lady Avalon is another arcade import. But she does give you extra NP damage and overcharge spice, and also amplifies your critical damage, which is an area where Draco does actually have a couple of things for. You could also honestly pivot to Koyan of Light, since Draco doesn't mind the cooldown reduction, and her non-NP cards are a majority buster. It won't make your NP damage explode quite as much, but she'll take the cooldown reduction, for sure. Also, just, getting jiggy with it, Draco is Chaotic Evil for domain support type stuff, and she is both animal and non-hominid for Koyan of Dark. And I want to say the big thing here is that Draco's amazing flexibility is also what matters here. Her trait damage can really, that's the part where if you get those traits to hit, you're going to talk about sending her damage into the stratosphere. And that's pretty good, because since she basically combos against any of the 7 knight classes, you can slot her into whatever. Consider running her with Romulus Quirinus. He can make all your enemies Roman. He also does good AoE damage. If you want to bully like a single target boss, bring in Georgios, hit his NP to force the enemy to become dragon trait, stuff like that. Like, Draco is super strong, but I think the more interesting part is the flexibility. She is a very utilitarian tool who can work her way into a lot of your pre-existing comps, and you can have a lot of fun that way. Now, for CEs, I do want to say, I'm personally unsure what your best options here are. Draco doesn't have an instant battery, so starting charge CEs are probably not ideal. Given that her overcharge effect is what's really going to set her damage apart from comparable servants, any CE that gives you the free overcharge level to start is probably worth it. Otherwise, in general, I would say focus on NP damage up, attack up, maybe arts up, though obviously that's not going to give you a lot of flexibility because she only has 1 arts card other than her NP. Crit up also probably wouldn't hurt either, but remember you may want to get some help generating stars, since her skill buff is just 10 for 3, which is pretty average, and her own passive star gen is pretty normal as well. I will also say that her Bond CE can be pretty fun. That's a further NP damage buff with a chance to augment it further on normal attacks if she has the Grail holding status. So that adds another flavor of buff amp, which can, again, really crank that damage. If you have a 90++ node that's got a guy who's a 7 knights class with like 2 million HP, Draco is a great way to clear that wave. And also note, Draco is going to be a bonus servant for the Lilim Harlot event, which will probably get a rerun, so there's going to be some event lineup. All right, let's hit him then with my other stuff section and hope that I got my point across about, is Draco broken or not? Sorry, I produce and consume a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh content. There's been many years where people have been like, this card is broken, and yeah, it's fine. Draco's good. She's not the end-all be-all of team comps. Roll based on your personal loves and how big your budget is. And I do think that's a point there where, like I said, NP1 will probably get you pretty far, chat, because her Ascension and Skills are baby mode. She's using, year 1 mats in all categories. No statues or gems. Once upon a time, 55 hearts probably would have been a huge burden, but if you've been playing the game for long enough, you probably have some in reserve, and if not, the game's improved tools should provide. You will get a decent selection of free mats from clearing, story nodes. You have access to pure prisms. You have access to better drop nodes and the drop CEs and stuff, so it should be manageable. Now, the main struggle here will be the relative rarity of this servant. So Draco is supposed to be fairly unique circumstance, arriving just because of the whims of a limited time story. So unlike other new SSRs, she is not included in Lucky Bag campaigns. She is still part of the Destiny Order GSSRs that have appeared, but do not count on seeing her in Lucky Bag GSSR setups. She also doesn't get a lot of regular raid ups either, though you never know, obviously, if more opportunities start to come. So her major raid ups we know of right now is the initial one in Lilim Harlot, and then the following year, Lilim Harlot was voted on to get a rerun event just so there could be another Draco banner. We can presume that either way, this rerun will still occur in EN, either because they'll just keep the same reruns because the EN player base is smaller than the JP one, so they'll just assume that it'll go that way. Or, even if they do open up the vote again, I'm going to tell you, Lilim Harlot's going to win so people get another Draco banner. It will happen that way. But do keep in mind the 10th anniversary is coming up. That's going to be pretty big. And I believe they did phrase it as they'd have a banner for every SSR this year, so don't count out, a Beast Week, even if that's just a special appearance during, the anniversary season. Also, don't forget, Draco has a unique summon animation, and I have been advised that it plays every time you get a summon, so you will know if you are rolling Draco copies. But that brings us to the end, the final revelation. The episode is now over. So, if you be liking all that stuff I said, like the video, leave us a comment, join our Discord, join the rolling thread on the Discord. We'll see you there. Make sure you're subbed to get more Wanteds, and also to get our podcast, Let's Talk FGO, posted hopefully every week, where I'm sure we'll be doing first impressions of Lilim Harlot, and you get to find out about all that stuff. Also, subbing and ringing the bell is good for knowing when we do streams, such as when Lucky did a very guerrilla stream for Rolling for Tiamat. If you did happen to miss that, you can check that out on our channel now, along with our other various live streams and videos, so that's a good reason to slam that bell. And we'll be keeping you up with some stuff. You can also join our channel memberships to access membership badges and emotes, such as during those streams and things. And you can support us on Patreon. I'm going to give a shout out to our highest level patrons a little bit later, but you can get this video early if you support us on Patreon. Normally, I would say after the musical outro, but I think I'm just going to skip the music outro bit because I already played Draco's NP theme. So we're just going to, softly fade into the distance. Let the archangels teach him. And before we get out of here, let's do a very special shout out to our patrons, such as, but not limited to, Adam DeHarp, Black Thisto G, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, JW9000, Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Rides of Kenji, Rogue Rabbin, Charvor, some guy named Bob, and Varen the Crow. If you like this video and you want to see us do more stuff like this, consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very much for your support, everybody. We'll see you next video.